look like Howard Moon. More and more. I look like Howard Moon. Are you fans of the Mighty Boosh? This is Howard Moon doing the bass here. Let's go from Howard Moon to Vince Noir, just like that. Oops, quite from Howard Moon to Vince Noir. Do the face. I have a mustache. It doesn't work. I have to shave. This is hip hop. Bap. I made yesterday. I like it, it's fun. I mean, these are bubblegum, they're throwaway compositions. They can hardly be called compositions, really. More like composites, you know. And today, doing some gluing of some materials. We got a killer new lighting schematic, I think. It's too close. There we go. It's supposed to brighten things up. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. So non-shielded LED action is now and hip hop bap. Which is hard to say. Hip hop bap. It's easier to say. Hip hop bap. Is the name of that track. Fun tune. This is slow beam, I believe. Yeah, it is. Slow beam is a funny word because a beam of light has a constant speed as per Einstein and co. Right? What is it, 186,000 miles a second, kilometers per second, something like that. So slow beam means the light is being slowed for the sound. But beam implies light, really. And then you think of Doppler effect in red and blue shifting. Slow beam is a nice word. That's the name of this track. Storm of the winter blows through the Bay Area. There was a 3.5 earthquake that shook the Bay as well today. After crazy heat waves and wildfires, now it's dumping snow and rain. In Los Angeles, the teachers walk out day 4. They're being dumped on with rain during the protests. If you've ever protested in the rain, and I have, it can be miserable. You know, like I'm thinking thinking more about the protesters right now than I am about anything else. All those kids are going to catch colds. Negotiations are set for noon today as losses mount and attendance dwindles. This by Howard Bloom in today's LA Times. More rain and the hope of progress in new talks. Negotiations are set to resume today for the first time in a week to settle the teachers' strike in the Los Angeles Unified School District. The venue will be City Hall, the time high noon. So that is in about 2 hours. The talks are resuming under the aegis of Mayor Eric Garcetti, although Garcetti himself has other events scheduled for much of the day. His observer in the talks is likely to be senior aide Matt Szabo. The mayor has said he will step in as needed. The teachers' strike is entering its 4th day, and although heavy rain dampened the turnout at some picket lines today, the job action is in full force, exacting a toll on teachers, families, and the school district, writes Howard Bloom in the LA Times today. On Wednesday, yesterday, fewer than a third of students came to school, the lowest number since the strike began, according to preliminary attendance figures. LA Unified officials have estimated the cost of the strike at $10 million to $15 million per day because state funding is based on student attendance. Teachers Union leader Alex Caputo Pearl, who we talked about in the previous piece, said, we met with Mayor Garcetti, Eric Garcetti, and he has offered to mediate in an effort to help us work toward an agreement, close quote. He added that State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, also had become involved. So that's the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Quote, Tony Thurmond has been in touch with both parties and offered support in the process. Caputo Pearl said, quote, we will be ready to bargain tomorrow and our team will work long and hard toward an agreement that benefits our students, members, and communities. Close quote. LA School Superintendent Austin Buettner has said for days that he is ready to resume bargaining, though neither he nor the district had yet to issue a comment on the new talks as of early today. The last round of talks between the LA Teachers Union and the district broke off last Friday. Since then, union leaders have been consumed with strike logistics and events. These include a protest Wednesday night outside the home of school board president Monica Garcia that was organized by a parents group closely allied with the union. And my sort of friend who is a student in the LAUSD is also out there protesting. She's in the 4th grade, I believe, and her parents are out there as well. So there seems to be a unified front despite heavy rains and miserable weather at protests. And today at noon, in about 1 hour and 50 minutes, they're all supposed to sit down and talk. So let's see what happens there. Second earthquake in 2 days. Today's 3.5 is the second one in 2 days up in the Bay Area. It's the 25th anniversary of the Northridge earthquake. And a second temblor in 2 days has woken up the Bay Area. Today's was at 6:11 this morning, about 2 miles southeast of Berkeley, 4 miles northeast of downtown Oakland. There was a 3.4 yesterday at 4:40 in the morning. Hayward fault line we're talking about. The East Bay is threatened by the Hayward Fault, which has been called a, quote, tectonic time bomb. A landmark report by the USGS last year estimates that at least 800 people could be killed and 18,000 more injured in a hypothetical magnitude 7 earthquake on the Hayward Fault centered below Oakland. The Hayward Fault is so dangerous because it runs through some of the most heavily populated parts of the Bay Area, spanning the length of the East Bay from the San Pablo Bay through Berkeley, Oakland, Hayward, Fremont, and into Milpitas, where all of my friends and loved ones are. Out of the region's population of 7 million people in the Bay, 2 million live on top of the fault, and that proximity brings with it potential peril. The fault has shaped the history of the Bay Area. Old city halls in Hayward and Fremont have been abandoned because they lie on the fault. At Memorial Stadium at UC Berkeley, seating was recently broken up and rebuilt so that the facility's western half could move 6 feet northwest from the other side. We watched that project. Massive. We moved it 6 feet northwest. In the hypothetical earthquake scenario, half of Memorial Stadium moves 2 feet northwest during the main earthquake, another foot over the next 24 hours, and yet another foot or so over the next few weeks or months. The so-called haywired, instead of Hayward, but haywired scenario envisions a scale of disaster not seen in modern California history. 2,500 people needing rescue from collapsed buildings and 22,000 being trapped in elevators. More than 400,000 people could be displaced from their homes, and some East Bay residents may lose access to clean running water for as long as 6 months. In some respects, the haywired scenario would be at least 10 times as bad for the Bay Area as the magnitude 6.9 Loma Prieta earthquake, despite the similar magnitude. The 1989 quake that was during the World Series. The 89 quake is blamed for about 60 deaths and produced $10 billion in damage. The haywired scenario envisions $82 billion in property damage and direct business losses, with fire following the earthquake potentially adding $30 billion more. A Hayward fault earthquake could trigger significant aftershocks on other faults for up to half a year after the main shock. In the haywired scenario, a large aftershock comes nearly 6 months after the main quake. A magnitude 6.4 close to Cupertino, the home of Apple's headquarters. Followed in close succession by a magnitude 6.2 temblor near Palo Alto, a key city in Silicon Valley, and a 5.4 back in Oakland. So Cupertino, Palo Alto, and Oakland. Aftershocks 6 months after this scenario that they're drawing, the haywired scenario, in order to prepare for extremes. The Hayward Fault is one of California's fastest moving and on average produces a major earthquake about once every 150 to 160 years, give or take 70 or 80 years. The last major earthquake on the Hayward Fault, a magnitude 6.8, had its 150th anniversary on October 21st. So, once every 150 to 160 years, give or take 70 or 80 years, and it's been 150 years as of October 21st of last year. In December, Oakland passed a law requiring some of its most vulnerable buildings, so-called soft story apartments with flimsy first stories, often for garages, to be retrofitted. San Francisco, Berkeley, and Fremont have similar laws, but many other Bay Area cities in the heart of California's booming tech region, including Palo Alto and Burlingame, have not acted. Hayward, a city mandatory retrofit law for soft story buildings. This is by Ronggong Lin II, in the LA Times. And there is an amazing account of the famous earthquake in San Francisco at the turn of the previous century, the 1906 quake, by Jack London. And perhaps we'll read that today. But they've had 2 little tremors, 3.5, 3.4, 2 days in a row near the Hayward Fault. And my thoughts and prayers are with all my close friends there. We have been... Oh, is this still rolling? Yeah, it is. Let's go back to the head of this too. rebar. Yeah, this is an appropriate time to read this, I think. This is entitled The Dream of Debs, and it was first published in the Saturday Evening Post, volume 181, May of 1909. It is included in this collection of stories, edited by Matthew Asprey, with a preface by Roger Jacobs, a long-time resident of the North Beach area. And I bought this from him, and he signed it. And I hadn't looked in here in many, many years, and it's very nice what he's written there. Keep the wind in your sails, even when there's no wind, says Roger to me. North Beach, back in 2011, and we were chatting about the book. I was very excited to have it. It's a collection that they've put together with different kind of logic, because of course London was mostly in the East Bay and on the bay quite often as a fisherman and as a member of the policing agency on the bay and so on. This is the San Francisco story, so they chose stories of London's that are in San Francisco. So for denizens of the city and fans and lovers of the city like myself, people who have left their heart there, this collection is particularly nice. And Roger and I were talking when he gave it to me. He said, you know what we did that I really like is the very last story is this piece written by London on the occurrence of the 1906 earthquake, the most devastating, sort of event. Oh yeah, no, sorry, I read the title wrong. It's called The Story of an Eyewitness. Okay, so not scratch what I just said regarding the Saturday Evening Post. That's the previous piece, and the thing about Debs was a workers' piece about the ILW, Longshoremen's Union. The title of this is, in fact, The Story of an Eyewitness. Okay. So yeah, so what Roger was telling me was he was really excited to have this be the last story in the collection of San Francisco stories for several reasons, and I've told many people about this story because we'll talk about it afterward. But in light of this morning's second tremor, with all love to Amy and to Phil and to Oakland and to Berkeley and to all my friends and loved ones there. The Story of an Eyewitness. Upon receipt of the first news of the earthquake, Colliers telegraphed to Mr. Jack London, who lives only 40 miles from San Francisco, requesting him to go to the scene of the disaster and write the story of what he saw. Mr. London started at once, and he sent the following dramatic description of the tragic events he witnessed in the burning city. The earthquake shook down in San Francisco hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of walls and chimneys, but the conflagration that followed burned up hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property. There is no estimating within hundreds of millions the actual damage wrought. Not in history has a modern imperial city been so completely destroyed. San Francisco is gone. Nothing remains of it but memories and a fringe of dwelling houses on its outskirts. Its industrial section is wiped out. Its business section is wiped out. Its social and residential section is wiped out. The factories and warehouses, the great stores and newspaper buildings, the hotels and the palaces of the nabobs are all gone. Remains only the fringe of dwelling houses on the outskirts of what was once San Francisco. Within an hour after the earthquake shock, the smoke of San Francisco's burning was a lurid tower visible 100 miles away. And for 3 days and nights this lurid tower swayed in the sky, reddening the sun, darkening the day, and filling the land with smoke. On Wednesday, at 5:15, came the earthquake. A minute later, the flames were leaping upward in a dozen different quarters south of Market Street. In the working-class ghetto and in the factories, fires started. There was no opposing the flames. There was no organization, no communication. All the cunning adjustments of a 20th century city had been smashed by the earthquake. The streets were humped into ridges and depressions and piled with the debris of fallen walls. The steel rails were twisted into perpendicular and horizontal angles. The telephone and telegraph systems were disrupted, and the great water mains had burst. All the shrewd contrivances and safeguards of man had been thrown out of gear by 30 seconds twitching of the earth crust. By Wednesday afternoon, inside of 12 hours, half the heart of the city was gone. At that time I watched the vast conflagration from out on the bay. It was dead calm. Not a flicker of wind stirred. Yet from every side wind was pouring in upon the city, east, west, north, and south. Strong winds were blowing upon the doomed city. The heated air rising made an enormous suck. Thus did the fire of itself build its own colossal chimney through the atmosphere. Day and night this dead calm continued, and yet near to the flames the wind was often half a gale, so mighty was the suck. Wednesday night saw the destruction of the very heart of the city. Dynamite was lavishly used, and many of San Francisco's proudest structures were crumbled by man himself into ruins. But there was no withstanding the onrush of the flames. Time and again successful stands were made by the firefighters, and every time the flames flanked around on either side or came up from the rear and turned to defeat the hard-won victory. An enumeration of the buildings destroyed would be a directory of San Francisco. An enumeration of the buildings undestroyed would be a line and several addresses. An enumeration of the deeds of heroism would stock a library and bankrupt the Carnegie Medal Fund. An enumeration of the dead will never be made. All vestiges of them were destroyed by the flames. The number of the victims of the earthquake will never be known. South of Market Street, where the loss of life was particularly heavy, was the first to catch fire. Remarkable as it may seem, Wednesday night, while the whole city crashed and roared into ruin, was a quiet night. There were no crowds. There was no shouting and yelling. There was no hysteria, no disorder. I passed Wednesday night in the path of the advancing flames, and in all those terrible hours I saw not one woman who wept, not one man who was excited, not one person who was in the slightest degree panic-stricken. Before the flames throughout the night fled tens of thousands of homeless ones. Some were wrapped in blankets. Others carried bundles of bedding and dear household treasures. Sometimes a whole family was harnessed to a carriage or delivery wagon that was weighted down with their possessions. Baby buggies, toy wagons, and go-karts were used as trucks, while every other person was dragging a trunk. Yet everybody was gracious. The most perfect courtesy obtained. Never in all San Francisco's history were her people so kind and courteous as on this night of terror. All night these tens of thousands fled before the flames. Many of them, the poor people from the labor ghetto, had fled all day as well. They had left their homes burdened with possessions. Now and again they lightened up, flinging out upon the street clothing and treasures they had dragged for miles. They held on longest to their trunks, and over these trunks many a strong man broke his heart that night. The hills of San Francisco are steep, and up these hills, mile after mile, were the trunks dragged. Everywhere were trunks, with across them lying their exhausted owners, men and women. Before the march of the flames were flung picket lines of soldiers, and a block at a time as the flames advanced, these pickets retreated. One of their tasks was to keep the trunk pullers moving. The exhausted creatures, stirred on by the menace of bayonets, would arise and struggle up the steep pavements, pausing from weakness every 5 or 10 feet. Often, after surmounting a heartbreaking hill, they would find another wall of flame advancing upon them at right angles and be compelled to change anew the line of their retreat. In the end, completely played out after toiling for a dozen hours like giants, thousands of them were compelled to abandon their trunks. Here, the shopkeepers and soft members of the middle class were at a disadvantage, but the working men dug holes in vacant lots and backyards and buried their trunks. At 9 o'clock Wednesday evening, I walked down through the very heart of the city. I walked through miles and miles of magnificent buildings and towering skyscrapers. Here was no fire. All was in perfect order. The police patrolled the streets. Every building had its watchman at the door. And yet, it was doomed. All of it. There was no water. The dynamite was giving out, and at right angles 2 different conflagrations were sweeping down upon it. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I walked down through the same section. Everything still stood intact. There was no fire, and yet there was a change. A rain of ashes was falling. The watchmen at the doors were gone. The police had been withdrawn. There were no firemen, no fire engines, no men fighting with dynamite. The district had been absolutely abandoned. I stood at the corner of Kearny and Market in the very innermost heart of San Francisco. Kearny Street was deserted. Half a dozen blocks away, it was burning on both sides. The street was a wall of flame, and against this wall of flame, silhouetted sharply, were 2 United States cavalrymen sitting on their horses, calming, watching. That was all. Not another person was in sight. In the intact heart of the city, 2 troopers sat their horses and watched. Surrender was complete. There was no water. The sewers had long since been pumped dry. There was no dynamite. Another fire had broken out further uptown, and now from 3 sides, conflagrations were sweeping down. The 4th side had been burned earlier in the day. In that direction stood the tottering walls of the Examiner building, the burned-out Call building, the smoldering ruins of the Grand Hotel, and the gutted, devastated, dynamited Palace Hotel. The following will illustrate the sweep of the flames and the inability of men to calculate their spread. At 8 o'clock Wednesday evening, I passed through Union Square. It was packed with refugees. Thousands of them had gone to bed on the grass. Government tents had been set up. Supper was being cooked, and the refugees were lining up for free meals. That was at 8 o'clock in the evening. At 1:30 in the morning, 3 sides of Union Square were in flames. The 4th side, where stood the great St. Francis Hotel, was still holding out. An hour later, ignited from top and sides, the St. Francis was flaming heavenward. Union Square, heaped high with mountains of trunks, was deserted. Troops, refugees, and all had retreated. It was at Union Square that I saw a man offering $1,000 for a team of horses. He was in charge of a truck piled high with trunks from some hotel. It had been hauled there into what was considered safety, and the horses had been taken out. The flames were now on 3 sides of the square, and there were no horses. Also, at this time, standing beside the truck, I urged a man to seek safety in flight. He was all but hemmed in by several conflagrations. He was an old man, and he was on crutches. Said he, "Today is my birthday. Last night I was worth $30,000. I bought 5 bottles of wine, some delicate fish, and other things for my birthday dinner. I have had no dinner, and all I own are these crutches." I convinced him of his danger and started limping him on his way. An hour later, from a distance, I saw the truckload of trunks burning merrily in the middle of the street. On Thursday morning at 5:15, just 24 hours after the earthquake, I sat on the steps of a small residence on Nob Hill. With me sat Japanese, Italians, Chinese, and Negroes, a bit of the cosmopolitan flotsam of the wreck of the city. All about were the palaces of the Nabob pioneers of '49. To the east and south, at right angles, were advancing two mighty walls of flame. I went inside with the owner of the house, on the steps of which I sat. He was cool and cheerful and hospitable. "Yesterday morning," he said, "I was worth $600,000. This morning, this house is all I have left. It will go in 15 minutes. He pointed to a large cabinet. "That is my wife's collection of china. This rug upon which we stand is a present. It cost $1,500. Try that piano. Listen to its tone. There are few like it. There are no horses. The flames will be here in 15 minutes. Outside the old Mark Hopkins residence, a palace was just catching fire. The troops were falling back and driving the refugees before them. From every side came the roaring of flames, the crashing of walls, and the detonations of dynamite. I passed out of the house. Day was trying to dawn through the smoke pall. A sickly light was creeping over the face of things. Once only the sun broke through the smoke pall, blood red and showing quarter its usual size. The smoke pall itself, viewed from beneath, was a rose color that pulsed and fluttered with lavender shades. Then it turned to mauve and yellow, and done. There was no sun. And so dawned the second day on stricken San Francisco. An hour later, I was creeping past the shattered dome of the city hall. There was no better exhibit of the destructive force of the earthquake. Most of the stone had been shaken from the great dome, leaving standing the naked framework of steel. Market Street was piled high with the wreckage, and across the wreckage lay the overthrown pillars of the city hall, shattered into short, crosswise sections. This section of the city, with the exception of the Mint and the post office, were already a waste of smoking ruins. Here and there, through the smoke, creeping warily under the shadows of tottering walls, emerged occasional men and women. It was like the meeting of the handful of survivors after the day of the end of the world. On Mission Street lay a dozen steers, in a neat row, stretching across the street just as they had been struck down by the flying ruins of the earthquake. The fire had passed through afterward and roasted them. The human dead had been carried away before the fire came. At another place on Mission Street, I saw a milk wagon. A steel telegraph pole had smashed down sheer through the driver's seat and crushed the front wheels. The milk cans lay scattered around. All day Thursday and all Thursday night, all day Friday and Friday night, the flames still raged on. Friday night saw the flames finally conquered, though not until Russian Hill and Telegraph Hill had been swept, and 3/4 of a mile of wharves and docks had been licked up. The great stand of the firefighters was made Thursday night on Van Ness Avenue. Had they failed here, the comparatively few remaining houses of the city would have been swept. Here were the magnificent residences of the second generation of San Francisco nabobs, and in a solid zone, these were dynamited down across the path of the fire. Here and there the flames leaped the zone, but these fires were beaten out, principally by the use of wet blankets and rugs. San Francisco at the present time is like the crater of a volcano, around which are camped tens of thousands of refugees. At the Presidio alone are at least 20,000. All the surrounding cities and towns are jammed with the homeless ones, where they are being cared for by the relief committees. The refugees were carried free by the railroads to any point they wish to go, and it is estimated that over 100,000 people have left the peninsula on which San Francisco stood. The government has the situation in hand, and thanks to the immediate relief given by the whole United States, there is not the slightest possibility of famine. The bankers and businessmen are already set about making preparations to rebuild San Francisco. First published in Collier's, May 5th, 1906, by Jack London. It's in this San Francisco Stories It is the ultimate story, and it is really marvelous, this collection. Published by an Australian press. You could probably find it on the net. The Australian was a grad student who had come to North Beach to study about Jack London. And he met Roger, who is somewhat of an expert on the author himself. And the two of them have composed a really excellent book here in which a spider has died in my copy. Yeah. Let's get some music going, sorry. But yeah, so there were 2 quakes, and I thought we'd read a little bit about the big one in 1906, which forms so much of San Francisco's culture. Informs, we should say. All San Franciscans, we all know the tales of it, you know. And the stories of the Restoration, which ultimately birthed the San Francisco we know today. Wow, what was that crazy light thing happening there? Oh, I plugged it in, that's why, right? Thought I'd give it a little juice. We're going to continue with consilience in just a few minutes. Jerdunger Jerk is the name of this. Jerdunger Jerk. Alright. Let's get into some consilience. We are reading Edward O. Wilson's consilience. The word means jumping together of things. You know, he wants to combine disciplines. He wants arts and sciences and humanities and philosophies to be jumped together to create greater knowledge. Unity of knowledge is the subtitle. And we are reading, I have been reading this book aloud for a couple of different reasons. Yesterday I described it to a friend, and so I'm just going to say what I said to him here on the show, the non-show, so that we can have it on the record. I had this revelation during the anticlimactic non-show that we did 20 episodes in December, when talking with Oris Tanner, the educator who came by. And we were noticing a kind of pattern wherein if, you know, things get really free, I mean free in terms of like the poor and the intellectual classes being able to really make effective statements about inequalities or other types of things, and at that moment something big will happen to quash that. And an assassination or an attack or a war. And in reflecting back in my own lifetime, during those conversations, I was telling Oris that more and more I feel like 1997, 1998, 1999, up until the 2000, which was a nothing. I called it MM was a nothing. MM was a nothing. We should make bumper stickers. MM was a nothing. The year 2000 was a nothing. So 97, 98, 99, as things were ending, there were a lot of things coming out. Tons of books that were about wrapping things up intellectually, or compendiums to save certain people. We can't have Borges disappear. So huge compendiums of all of Borges's work just before the millennium starts, because the digital generation will just erase all the stuff that's not, relevant to them, or present. And so we had Ronald Takaki's A Different Mirror. We had Cornel West. We had a lot of different people writing original work then that I think got erased pretty promptly once the new era began, the authoritarian and military era that's dominated our country since the attacks of 9/11. And I was thinking about going back into those and picking out a few and reading them aloud. And so I chose Consilience. I chose it purposefully because it's not radical. It's not, crazy talk or anything. It's just a biologist, a well-known biologist, very intelligent man. And he's using and he's from Alabama. And he learned and practiced the sciences during the height of, postmodern, action. So after the wars and with the full history, behind him, standing on the shoulders of the European giants, if you will. So his approach is very much about that, which makes it easy for any of us to listen to it or read it or follow it. And we can use it now, 20 years later, to criticize. Well, so what I was hoping you would do is you would, watch these and then comment on the ones that you listen to. And that could be even to deride him. It doesn't matter. But what I like about this is Consilience is a thesis that I really was attracted to in 1998. I was in New York. I was working as an artist and as an editor and as a writer. That year I would have been at the New School, perhaps, as well, I think. Anyway, a lot of what I was doing was practicing the act of consilience, if you will, without having that term available. Putting together different disciplines to try to express different things, or using science in a different way, or using the arts in a way in the science world, or all kinds of things. So I was attracted to the notion of consilience. And I've spoken too long about this. What I ought to do so that I can save myself editing time is wrap up the show and then do a separate consilience chunk. Because that way I won't have to edit it out. But it's good to talk about this. We'll save this under why I'm reading Consilience and why I'm reading it aloud and what I'm hoping will happen. It's not contentious, it's not radical, it's not threatening, and it does firm up some real science that people are nowadays tossing out like crazily, flat Earth and no moon land, all whatever. this firms up a basis, a place to start, if you will. And if people want to, if someone wants to resist anything that I read from this book, they will be basically resisting the predominant current scientific thought. Okay? Cool, you can do that. I'll continue making fun of you, but, you know, whatever. Or you can change my mind through some amazing discourse. But I like the idea, right, of once it's done, it would be cool to share the entire book, right, which I'm reading in basically 15 to 20 minute chunks with people and have them comment on stuff. So what I'm going to do is, after finishing it, or maybe even before, I'm going to start making some comments on sections of the book. Because just reading it to you, my mind is filled with all kinds of reactions I want to have, but I'm not having them because I'm just reading the book to you during this part of the thing. And then later, I have all these thoughts that I want to comment or discuss, and so I'm going to put those comments there. So I was hoping you would do the same, right? You listen to a chapter, or a section, if you will, and you tell me what it makes you think about, and what your reactions are, and what your thoughts are, and etc. I think that'd be cool. No? Yes? I don't know. But it is a fascinating work, and we're doing the Enlightenment next. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this and restart. I'm cutting that nether thing now because I have a thing I want to produce, but I don't want to attach it on here. And I want it to go an hour if I could each time, so... Hey! What's happening? It's your host, MTK. This is the anti-climax. It's not. It's the Middleman's... Wait, no, it's not. It never has a name. I'm liking the Middleman's Perch. I am naming the live stream the Middleman's Perch. So, I guess it's the Middleman's Perch. With your host, MTK, that's me. You can call me MT. This one's called the Perch Boat. Crunch bump, it's called. The Jack London was cool, right? Roger. Let's see if this book is purchasable. And Roger's quote was great. You know? I love this. That's great advice from Roger, one of the editors on this book. I'll say it to all of you. Keep the wind in your sails. What do you mean, where does it go? It goes behind the Tony Williams, of course. Maybe we can take a look at some news, what we'll do for the last 8.5 minutes of the program. I will take a look at some news around the world. We talked earlier today about the earthquake felt in the Bay Area and then read that Jack London story reporting on the 1906 quake, which I thought was, I wonder if that's tempting fate, as they say, but that's not the way to look at that. You know, things happen, is the way to look at it. And good writers observe faithfully and report on what they saw. I think are the two things we can take away from that. It's all bad news, folks. Oh my god, this is so depressing. Just even opening the news pages, it's like I want to try to stop saying you in those situations. I hear a lot of people do it. Dan Patrick does it all the time. I do not want to do that anymore. So I'm going to work on not saying, when I'm doing something, saying, oh, you know, you go here and you do this. No, you don't. I am going here and I'm doing this. And it's an insecure use of the terminology. You know, so we're not going to do that. We, I use all the time. We, I believe in. Not that I have multiple personalities, but that there's a we. Somewhere there's someone like me. I'll cut the strings, man, as soon as I meet that person, I'll tell you. If you don't know what that means, look up the Chinese story. Alright, depressing. Oh, depressing? Yeah, depressing. Is this depressing? Yeah, very depressing. How about this? Is this over here depressing? Very. What about that? Is that depressing? Absolutely. There's not much here to discuss in a joyful way, my friends, from the Washington Post, the New York Times, or the BBC at the moment. So let's take a look at something somewhere else. We were talking about San Francisco and the old quake. Let's take a look at the crime. Nasty storm battering the Bay Area leads to 5 deaths. Flooding. Power outages this morning. Nasty storm battering Bay Area. The brunt of the storm has now passed. We are behind the cold front now. What we are going to see today is the development of scattered and widespread rain showers with isolated thunderstorms, close quote, said Drew Peterson, meteorologist with the National Weather Services. 3.5 quake in Piedmont. A massive tree down on Mission Street. Knocked out Uni in South of Market. Nasty storm. PG&E bankruptcy is dominating the news in the Bay Area right now because that's going to make things real ugly. It's good that Gavin is the mayor under this moment of transition for PG&E. I'll tell you that, in my opinion. Oh, Carol Channing has passed away. Her career began in San Francisco. She went to Lowell High. Wow. I'll have this one too. DB Groove, it's called. Except the U has an umlaut, so it's DB Groove. DB Groove. Yeah. Yeah. Qu'est-ce que c'est pas? Qu'est-ce que c'est ça? Alright, I'm going to translate something from Le Monde here in the last 2.5 minutes. Michael Zadkowski. This is written in French, and I'm reading a translation of Michael Zadkowski's piece, so forgive me if this is messed up. But headline: Facebook disables hundreds of unauthentic accounts, with unauthentic in quotes, fake accounts, active in Eastern Europe and managed in Russia. The social network has unveiled 2 networks of fake accounts, active for several years and intended to promote the interests of Russia in a dozen countries. Facebook teams announced today that they have disabled hundreds of Facebook and Instagram accounts that were created in Russia but were mainly active in recent years in several countries bordering Eastern Europe. These closures have occurred because of their unauthorized activities carried out in a coordinated way, said Facebook in a statement. Mark Zuckerberg's company criticizes the administrators of these accounts for having created Facebook and Instagram pages in Russia to broadcast content in other countries without clearly mentioning the origins and intentions behind the broadcast of these messages. Wow, Zuckerberg's, you guys shouldn't be using it that way. That's what he's doing. This is his reaction. Such uses of Facebook are normally prohibited by the terms of use of the social network. Facebook claims to have foiled 2 separate operations, but which have similar operating modes. Pages and accounts have been active in Eastern European or Central Asian countries on various themes: weather, sports, travel, economic activities, political figures. But they broadcast messages piloted from Russia and can serve Russian interests. In both cases, these networks of fake pages have spent tens of thousands of euros to broadcast advertising messages to promote their messages. All these fake pages and fake accounts have gathered nearly 1 million Facebook subscribers in all the countries concerned. There's big details here on this piece. This is a long and interesting piece, very recently posted to Le Monde. So I bet it's in English already as well. We are 60 seconds from doing an hour. Yay! The least compelling programming on the internet. That's right. I'm MTK with the Middleman's Perch. The least compelling content anywhere. That was 9 seconds too short.